Dear panelists, it's an honor to have you here. So let's try to discuss and reveal what are the key challenges and key success factors in PPPs. And we have representatives both from public and private sector here. We have also a representative from financing party, and we have an independent expert on a panel. So I'm sure we're going to have a very interesting and discussion from a variety of perspectives. And I would like to start with Jekaterina. Jekaterina, a number of factors have impact on successful implementation of a PPP project, and probably one of the main ones is how good certain PPP is structured, right? And so what are the main goals of public sector and key interests of private sector that should be coordinated between them and reflected in a PPP structure? And also, whether there is any space for negotiations, whether enough space for negotiations, and where things can go wrong in structuring PPP.
Thank you, Simona, for the question. I first apologize for my voice. I am not the heavy smoker. I just lost my voice on the way here. So please be patient. Yes, first let us remind what is the PPP project structure about. Yes, we have the architecture of the project contract, PPP agreement itself, and we have the financial flows during the life of the project cycle. And the main element of this project contract is, of course, the risk sharing and the payment mechanism. So everywhere where we're speaking about risk sharing, about the relationships between two partners, or about the payment arrangement, we can go wrong. Everywhere we have a risk, and first of all, of course, things will and definitely will go wrong when the public sector itself does not understand what it is going to achieve. When it is not able to formulate the clear requirement for the service provision, to establish the service standard, and in this case, it is not possible to formulate the clear requirement for the private sector, and it is even not possible to estimate the costs of the service which will be delivered and not estimate the value at risk. And when it happens, when public sector could not explain what kind of service it would like to achieve, it is concentrating on the requirement to the public procurement. It means it goes back to the public procurement and try to put the strict requirement for the construction itself. That means that it takes back all the risks related to the construction suitability, construction requirement, and the risk sharing moving again back to the public sector. It means the public sector is doing a bad job in this case. Of course, things will go wrong when public sector will put wrong expectation toward public-private partnership, and it is the lot of cases we have before. I will comment later, but for some reasons, public sector is expecting that something can come for free. And then it puts the very high requirement or the service level which never was affordable beforehand, which was never affordable for the public sector itself, and for some reasons public sector believe that private will deliver even for less price than public can do. So everything may and will go wrong when we're trying to apply the traditional approach to the PPP. And I'm sorry to say that the public sector is very inertial in this case. We used to provide the service ourselves for tens of years, and it is very difficult to switch to another mode. And we're still trying to keep our responsibility, our intervention in all stages. And unfortunately, the financial sector and the private sector are also that inertial. And it takes time for all three of us to learn what is so different with public-private partnership.
Okay, and Actually, statistics shows that almost 100 institutions have applied to Central Project Management Agency during 2010-2016 with intention to initiate a PPP project. And also a number of institutions have prepared like investment projects and tender documents, and we have less than 10 PPP projects implemented or being implemented. So what's the reason for that, and why we have so few of successful projects?
A very good question, and I tried to ask Camillo during the break why it is so, because we were assessed as a very mature country in terms of system preparation for the PPP. But my opinion is that the PPP promotion campaign, which we ran in 2010-2012, you might remember the intensive one, it was really very intensive and very strongly supported politically. And I'm afraid it, for a certain extent, built the wrong expectation, and the added value of PPP was miscommunicated. And most of people expected that it will be quite quick and quite cheap. And all we know that quick and cheap is always opposite, that good. It might be quick and cheap if you wish, but in this case, their case will never move ahead further than to the tender. Because you can mislead yourself if you wish, you could cheat yourself, but you never can cheat the market, and they will just not trust you, and your tender will never happen. And we have a practical case when the public institution having these not bankable cases, trying to repeat tendering procedure 5, 6, 7 times, still hoping that someone will come and solve their problems. And maybe one important moment that some of institutions were trying to apply PPP in the projects which are not feasible and not viable with or without PPP at all. It means that the project were not a priority for the public institution. They even don't know whether they need this or not need it, but just it was the case. Maybe private partner will do something for me, and then we will see how it will happen. Of course, it was better to stop these cases in the very beginning and not to spend a lot of money to preparation. And the last moment is that when we started this broad PPP promotion campaign, we started to promote the pilot cases in the number of sectors, tens of sectors. And of course, we were not ready for it because we needed the capacity on the public side in each sector, and we needed to walk out to develop the prototypes for the PPP cases immediately in the number of sectors. And we were not ready for that. Financial market was not ready for it, and private market was not ready for this case. And it appeared that to develop this unique case first time for all 3 partners is very, very costly. And many projects were just cancelled when we understood that they are not affordable for us.
And Jekaterina, also referring to a number of presentations from yesterday, regulatory framework was also identified as one of the major factors, for success. And regulatory framework in Lithuania is considered to be within, international standards. But is that really so? And do you see any space for improvement here?
Of course, there are always space for improvement, and despite of the fact that we have a matured system, we do not have that matured users of the system. And it is my personal understanding that we believe that everyone who is trying to apply the complex system of the legal acts which we need to analyze to create the case will be understandable for anyone in municipality and in the public institution, and it is not the case. And what I am also trying to say now to everyone, that not only the legal environment, but the direction is not clear. We are trying to work at the project cases. We're doing a lot of trying to help the project to be well developed, matured, prepared, but still project is in the certain environment. And when we do not have this enable environment, we do not have the way for success for the project. And the other things is up to now missing in Lithuania. It is the clearly formulated PPP policy. Why we do need PPP, when we do need PPP, why we want to apply it in one or another sector, what we expect from the PPP in each case. And I believe that this policy will help us to concentrate our efforts and to move in the one clear but long directions, which will communicate our intentions to the private sector and build certain credibility between the partners.
Okay. Camillo, having worked across multiple studies, focusing on enabling conditions for PPPs, could you tell us what do you think are those key conditions which should be taken into account when structuring PPP?
Through our Infrascope study, we have stressed that it's a combination of factors, including regulations, institutions, previous experience, business environment, and also financing facilities. But we do really emphasize the role of regulations as a starting point for an efficient and sustainable framework, because it's the condition that governments can more easily influence to begin with. So they can start by defining the institutional roles so that adequate public capacity can develop in sectors. And also they need to build a coherent framework and a stable framework that can attract investors. We have seen, for example, countries that have developed successful PPP projects in terms of the size of infrastructure, but further down the line you see that if they don't have these regulatory best practices, you find that there are inefficiencies and there is impact on sustainability in terms of public finances, the communities and the environment. So we really advocate for the incorporation of best practices to avoid these difficulties further down the line.
So which are those best practices? Which countries do you think could serve as an example to Baltic countries for successful implementation of PPP projects?
So we've done a number of studies across regions over the years, and if you want to look at global leaders, there are countries like the UK and Australia. In terms of our more recent study, I guess a comparable country would be the leader in Eastern Europe, which was Slovakia. I guess it can offer some interesting lessons, being also a EU country. It's a country that has a good combination of regulations, institutions, business environment, and that has developed a complex PPP project. I guess in our past examination of the Baltics, we did find that it had a good good assessment of regulations and institutions, and indeed that's the case for most EU countries. Once they harmonize with EU standards, they achieve a good regulatory framework. But we find that, there are lessons to be learned from countries from other regions. For example, in our recent examination, we found that Latin America is quite ahead in terms of incorporating sustainability criteria in project planning and implementation, and perhaps there could be lessons to learn from that. At the same time, we have very experienced countries such as Turkey and Brazil, so it would be good to look at how they have developed the technical capacity to implement large-scale projects.
Thank you. I would like to turn now to Giedrius. Giedrius, you have participated in financing a number of flagship infrastructure projects in Finland, Sweden, Russia, and Poland. Tell us, please, which country of the mentioned ones, in your opinion, has the best experience in implementing PPP projects, and what could we learn from them?
Good morning, everybody. So naturally, of course, probably not Russia and Poland, because in Poland they had tried some PPP projects like on national level like 10 years ago, but we didn't achieve like real risk transfer because it was like semi-guaranteed structures. Then they have some ambitious plans now, but they are still not moving ahead. But also Nordic countries probably also would not be like a perfect examples because they are not such countries which implement PPPs in like vast quantities like UK, Netherlands or France. But if we stick to Nordics, I probably could name Finland and Norway because they both had implemented several very successful PPP projects. Norway had a pipeline of 3 projects 10 years ago, which were completed and operational and everything goes smoothly. Now they have another pipeline which are under tender process at the moment, like 3 projects and possibly more. And Finland, they also had quite successful 4 road projects, and they are trying to do some smaller scale like school projects, some bridge project PPPs. And what can be learned from these countries? So I think I don't want to dig very deeply in much details, but we can summarize. First of all of those countries use the best practice experience. They do not try to reinvent the bicycle themselves. They just, what that means in practice, they simply replicate UK PFI model, adapt it, of course, to local legal requirements, etc. Then they show initially the pipeline of projects, not like, okay, we do 1 project and later we don't know. They show initially a pipeline of 3 projects, which when they attract attention of international investors, they know that, okay, if you come to the market, it's not 1 project, but there is some waiting ahead. The projects needs to be the right size. It's neither too small nor too large, meaning from 200 to 500 million euros approximately. And the last but not least, they all had used good advisors supporting the public sector, because without a good advisors you really cannot move with procurement PPP projects. And good advisors means that it's not the ones who advised only public sector, but we need really to go through the whole cycle of a project. We need to have advised several projects for public sector, private sector, bankers, when we know what kind of expectations, requirements are from each sector. And if you have those 3 elements, you can very successfully procure PPP projects. And funny thing, they do not have those regulations, very, like special concession laws or very strict requirements, how you apply PPP approach. They just simply need to have normal regulatory environment, taxation laws which supports PPP, and that's the key.
And so what would you name as the most common deficiencies, mistakes made by public partner in structuring PPP and making a certain project non-bankable?
No, I think also we can maybe name several factors. First of all, economics of projects needs to work, because if a project is too large, like airport, which public sector wants to build it too big, basically, which doesn't accommodate like economics. So we looked at several projects which we need then to downsize to make it smaller in order to work, or like toll roads if its projections are too optimistic. So of course the economics needs to work. Then of course you need to have bankable PPP agreement if it's availability-based project. First of all, you need to have good risk allocation, meaning that risk needs to be allocated correctly. Then termination provisions, payment mechanism. So if you have bankable PPP agreement, should be everything okay. Then I think the third issue is the creditworthiness of participants, both on public sector and on private sector. Because if you have, let's say, a small municipality which procures too big project, then you have a risk that probably that municipality will not perform its obligations. So it's also an issue for lenders and for private sector. The same also if you pre-qualify bidders who are not able to procure projects, like if it's too small construction companies, then you also have a problem. Because if it's construction company with turnover of 20 million and they try to implement project of 100 million size, so it's like small cost overrun of 10% could wipe out the whole equity, and basically you're in trouble. And then of course the countries which, as I repeat myself, which do not utilize advisors, they think that, okay, they have all the knowledge in the public sector when they do it themselves. But when it turns out, the project doesn't go very far from that.
And what is the trend? Can you notice increase of requests, applications to finance infrastructure PPP?
No, unfortunately, we do not see the increase. And if you compare like before crisis period, so now we've seen diminishing, the decreasing demand for PPPs. And of course now, if I talk for that geographic area where I'm responsible, we see some pipeline in Germany. Also, okay, Norway has something, but despite that, it's really like some countries has like one project. Like now we see some activity in Latvia, for instance, if we talk about Baltic region. There is one project in the preparation for tender phase, and we think about another one. We had hoped for some projects in Lithuania before, but one project was cancelled. Airport concessions is with question mark, as I understand.
We'll look forward to them after 2020, right?
Sorry?
No, we'll be looking forward to them after 2020.
Yeah, so I mean, of course, then discussed also yesterday, when the support from structural funds will decrease, that means that maybe we can see increase of PPP use.
Yes.
But having in mind that those projects have very long preparation phase, so actually now politicians, if they want to implement, they need to think now, because it takes like 3-4 years before the tender documents could be released to prepare everything, like preliminary design, environmental studies, etc. So it takes really long time of preparation.
Raimondas, Kauno tiltai has achieved a great success in the process of Palanga bypass project. And so what would you identify as the main factors for successful implementation of PPP, and also what would you name as the main challenges from your experience?
Okay, just to start with, it's worth to consider what is Palanga project. So it has two important factors why it is slightly exceptional from normal maybe PPPs. One of them is that it is the first generalized PPP project, and the second is that it is relatively small. It is the total size of the project is about total payments. I mean, it's 30 million euros, so it's not something very huge as we consider maybe right now in Latvia. And these two things, it allows it to be treated slightly differently. So the success of Palanga was mainly based, I would say, on really good cooperation of the public sector, from the public sector part. I mean, all the parties involved, they were really eager to work hard in order to make this project to succeed, because it is the first one. So we had very good cooperation with Lithuanian Road Authority, with municipalities of Palanga, municipalities of Kretinga, with Invest Lithuania, with also Central Project Management Agency also was involved slightly, and everybody was really willing to do it. And since it was small, it was also easier, I would say, to work with a financing party, SEB Bank, for example, and they were also be able to be flexible and accommodate many different conditions. And I would say this is one of the success, but it's not really repeatable. I mean, these things. So then you have to turn to the possible challenges. And the challenge for Palanga was, at least, was actually what Jekaterina mentioned and touched upon very much. It is the preparation of a project. Palanga was initiated in 2009. And the construction commenced actually in 2014. So you can imagine, it took 5 years until the construction. It was constructed in 2015 and started operating in the spring of 15. And this long time, it involves very many risks and unpredictable things. For example, the easiest example is the fact that you calculate the project cost in 2009 after the crisis, and then you have to build it in 2014 when the economy is actually already booming, at least in the fact, booming, not in the words of politicians, but still, it had so different pricing level. And therefore, if we really want to have a successful PPP, one of the crucial factors, I think, is the predictability from the public sector side. I mean, if you have unpredictable thing, fundamentally, you will have higher prices. because the private partner who will be participating there, he will be able to participate there, but he will always include the risk factor into the pricing. I mean, if you are fearing that the prices will increase, you must have a buffer. So if you want to have it really on optimal pricing, then you have to have very predictable and as short term as possible between the initial biddings and the actual when you can start the construction. So this is one thing. Another challenge, at least in Lithuania, what I noticed was actually management of the public opinion. Also, Jekaterina mentioned that. And as soon as Palanga project was announced, it was announced in the fact that now we will start to build it, and the major parameters of it wasn't announced publicly. It was maybe in the spring of 2000. No, it was in the autumn of 2013. The next day, we have a few periodicals issuing articles where an expert who didn't want his name to be disclosed for sure is saying that no, this is too expensive road. You can build it 3 times as cheap. And the problem is that, in a way, he's right, because if you're talking only about the construction cost of such a road, then for sure you can build it more or less for 40% of the total payments of the structure. The problem is that the PPP involves so much more. I mean, the maintenance, the cleaning of the road, the fact that after 20 years of exploitation it will be renovated and submitted to the government in the state of let's say, new road, basically. And this is not included, and it takes time to explain. So it's very good. It looks very good on the headline, but when people normally, for people, the attention span is what, like now 10 seconds to read the headline that you pay 30 million for something which is worth 10 million, and it takes a long time to explain what is involved and not. So it's very important actually to educate the public that it would be a common knowledge. I would compare it with the fact that now in the world it is common knowledge that the world is round, but when you look at it, it seems flat. So it took years and years of education so that it becomes the common knowledge that nobody is arguing about. I mean, at least if you're not crazy. So something like this should happen with the PPP.
Yes, communication and learning is of key importance. You would like to comment, Jekaterina? Yes.
Yes, if I may, I would like to comment, and thank you for raising this issue. That really the number of questions of best practice and could we learn from somebody else were asked, but in my understanding, we can learn only from our own practice or from our own mistakes, and best practice is still in front of us. You know that now we have 42 active PPP projects. 2 are mentioned, but we have really 42, most of them in the small municipal services like heating, water, waste management, leisure, and 20 in the queue of preparation. But the story of this 42, it is the story of our learning, of our mistakes and correcting of the mistakes. When we were in the grade 1, it was the first time we adopted the loan concession. There were no control, no requirement, no competence, and you can imagine what the results are. Unfortunately, that results now are very well being seen, and they are making the public opinion on what PPP is. And despite of the fact that we already corrected all the mistakes, we introduced the new methodologies, we improved the capacity and competence, we did a lot of good job, but still public is thinking that the PPPs look like what we done 20 years ago, making all possible mistakes. Each project for us is the school. We are learning. They are not the best examples, but they are very good examples for learning. And we are trying to correct all the environment, all the methodologies, all the processes after each practical case. And I believe that we will manage to do it better and better.
I maybe want to comment about this. I a bit disagree with the approach that you need to learn from your own mistakes. It's absolutely not correct. I mean, it's so easy to just take and implement what is the best.
But we heard yesterday that, learning to do PPP is doing PPP.
It's just waste of time of public sector, private sector, of lenders. It's absolutely no way to go. And those 42 PPPs, I know Lithuania's marketing, we have 42. No, they are not PPPs. I mean, there are some service concessions which, okay, we can decide on definition what is PPPs, but if we have basically those 2, 3, 4 maybe PPPs in Lithuania, which also are very small, not international size, unless you really have one big international project attracting foreign investors also international lenders, and when you go through the whole process until successful financial close, then you can say, yes, finally we have pilot PPP projects. Now we can have the same documentation, we can replicate because you know that this is success. Now if I take even successful like Palanga bypass project, I cannot tell to my Latvian colleagues who now implement Kekava, look, this is the prime example of a project, please copy this and you will succeed. No, it's no way. I rather recommend them to look in the Netherlands or some other markets or Finland.
Okay, so since we are out of time, actually, I would like to round up by giving you, all of you, one more last question. Yesterday we heard about the project called An Idea for Lithuania. So now you, one idea for breakthrough of successful PPP projects in the Baltics. Which would like to start?
Idea for project itself, or the idea for
no,
the
just
approach?
one idea, one suggestion, how
one
to improve.
One suggestion would be to think that you and your children will pay for the rest of their life for your mistakes and your expenses and your ambitions. Now just be careful and take responsibility for the next generation when taking decisions.
I would probably repeat myself saying that, okay, you need, first of all, political support, and this managing public opinion is very important. And then, of course, this using just best practice experience if you really want to do something.
Yeah, I think my idea would be to support knowledge creation, so integrating best practices in the public sector, but also continue to have adequate reporting practices in ongoing projects, so there is continuous learning as these projects are developed.
Okay. Actually, I have always a general idea which is answer to all the problems every time, which is actually education, but it was mentioned here. So I would say that also we have to be courageous and decisive, simply. And then when you implement it, you have to look at, when you implement any project, including PPP, you just have to really carefully look at the benefits and costs and then estimate it with open eyes. It's actually simple.
Thank you all. Let's hope these ideas will materialize. Do we have any questions from the audience?
Working, or can you hear me? Okay, now. Türkiye Kuldoğan Gülermak, I have one question, and I would like to get your feedback, especially from Economist Intelligence Unit and from CPMA. When we look at PPP process, there is great convergence across the world. When we look at PPP process, there is great convergence across the world. So everything is transparent. You can compare, for example, from concession contract or PPP contract, every clause is known, right? I mean, you can compare, and everything is in web. Quite convergence in terms of the strength of the contract. And you look at the regulatory environment, things like that. But how about the regulatory environment in terms of public procurement, in terms of the initial application process? Okay, and the quality of that process, because I personally have experience from Turkey, and we use that experience in Europe. And despite Lithuania, and I'm hearing the same thing, Latvia is, Lithuania especially is in European Union, great divergence in terms of the application process. Do you take that into account, in terms of your calculations? And if I give one idea, the idea for Lithuania is the application process, because we have one example where, compared to other Central Eastern European countries, the application process is like, don't enter. Okay.
Jekaterina, maybe you can.
If I understood correctly, the question is how and to what extent the public procurement process is applied for the PPP. In our case, it is 100%. We fully follow the PPP law. in each stage, in preparation, in approval, in the forms of documents. We are using the procedures and the rules which are prescribed in the public procurement law. So in our case, it is 100 compliance with the public procurement law. When it is not concession, but PPP, we are following the public procurement law.
Thank you.
A question to Jekaterina and Raimondas. I'm thinking about the proactive approach. Do you think this private initiative legal framework is something that we could build on and try to convince public sector that some PPP alternatives would be more reasonable alternatives to the usual way of doing things?
Thank you, Shruna. It is a very good question. And we legalized the possibility for private initiatives already 2 years ago. The problem is that we're still thinking how to make it functioning, because you know that we still are very strongly planned the country. We have strategic plans, planning documents, programs, whatever. And in order to sign for PPP project, we need these objectives and this idea to be already planned somewhere in the strategic document. It is the first. The second, we're still trying to arrange the compensation for the private entity which will design the case, invest some money in order to develop the investment project, and probably will not win the case in the end of the story. So, of course, in order to motivate private entities to come and to bring the initiatives, we need to assure them that their expenses will be compensated. And I believe that it is a more serious question than the planning question. Plans are open, strategic documents are open. If you see the possibility for yourself to come with initiatives, I think it will be considered.
Thank you. Any more questions? Would you like to comment?
Just a follow-on question for Raimondas. You as a road construction company, would you be willing to initiate a project based on the private initiative legal framework?
I think in this case, we should separate a little bit, because while I represent a construction company, the PPP projects, they consist of several projects in itself, right? One is the construction, and it is the physical engineering part. Another part is the maintenance and overseeing, which is, let's say, business part and collecting the money if it is or if it's not. And the third part is the financial engineering. So these are different parts to be made by different parties. And Kauno Tiltai as a construction company, to be honest, we are a construction company. So I'm not sure if we would have a very good idea, for sure we would submit it and we would try to promote it. But this is not directly our business. I mean, I think what one thing is lacking in Lithuania is really the capacity of professional PPP creators. Because when you look at the construction companies, our competence is to build things. But there is another competence needed to create PPPs, to structure them, and so on. So I would address the question to you, Šarūnas, to be honest.
I thank you all. It was a pleasure having you here.